Welcome to Where I'm From, the podcast that proves no matter how far you go, you'll always keep a little piece of home with you. I'm Bill Meeks.
And now it's time for part 2 of my discussion with Rebecca Johnson about where she's from, Birmingham, Alabama. I'll ask Rebecca what it was like growing up in Birmingham, why she left to pursue a media career in Atlanta, and what drew her back years later. Okay, let's talk to Rebecca. All right, Birmingham. Okay, so are there any local scandals or urban legends or Birmingham stories that you think people who don't live there might find interesting?
Scandals. I mean, obviously there's the civil rights movement had a lot of things that happened in Birmingham.
Oh yeah.
The 16th Street bombing happened in Birmingham. I actually drove by it today. That was interesting because when I worked at WVTM, that was during the time when I forget all the details, but they eventually prosecuted those guys who set off the bombs, and they figured out who it was, and they put those guys away. And that happened while I was working in news. I remember that being a monumental thing that they, all those many decades later, got justice for what happened at 16th Street.
Why don't you explain to the listeners, if they don't know, what exactly happened?
Basically, when you boil it down, 16th Street Baptist Church is a church in downtown Birmingham. And one morning, everybody was going to church on a Sunday. And there were 4 little girls in this little Sunday school class who there was a bomb that was set off, and they died in that explosion.
Oh, wow.
It was done by some pretty bad guys who I guess just had an animosity towards the Black people of that church. And so it was very contentious in Birmingham during the civil rights era. There's a lot of horror stories about Bull Connor, who was a politician at the time, who he put hoses on the Black people downtown. And there's horrible pictures of that happening. So that's probably the worst part of Birmingham's history. I'm trying to think if there are any like funny scandals that would have been something that would have been
because that was the
more
opposite.
Humorous. Yes, that's pretty serious. But one of the things I think should be said about Birmingham that I never hear anybody talk about, and which always kind of upsets me about the way I think it was called the Green Book, the Black Book, whatever that movie was called that won all those Oscars about the guy who drove the famous Black guy around, and they went to those places that were safe for Black people at the time.
Oh yeah, I can't remember what it's called. But
the Green Book, maybe. In that movie, it portrays Birmingham as this racist place, and at the time, it probably some of that was going on. But it's upsetting for me to watch that stuff now because Birmingham has moved so past that.
Yeah.
I'm so pleased with how people treat each other in Birmingham, either downtown Birmingham or the outer suburbs that are associated with it. And I'm so glad that that's not the case anymore. So I wish more people talked about how we've progressed as a society here in Birmingham since those terrible times.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to make that be mentioned that, we're not all Bull Connors down here. We actually get along fairly well. And maybe that's why I can't think of any scandals.
I will say that that's absolutely, good to hear that it feels like it's moved on from, the really bad old days. Where do you think Birmingham, especially like on these issues of race and things that it's known for, where do you think it stands now in comparison to, say, any other modern American city?
I'm sure some people would probably not believe me when I say this, but I think we're probably, in my experience, maybe other people have experiences that would inform them otherwise, but I think we're down here in Birmingham and maybe even in Alabama, the South. I don't see a lot of prejudice stuff going on. I live there, Black people in my neighborhood. I work with Black people, and I never see things, and I don't want that to be like, well, I have a Black friend. I'm not doing that kind of thing. I'm just saying that I don't see those kinds of things going on, and maybe it's because it's not in my area. I don't know, but I remember being in Railroad Park, which is now a really beautiful part of downtown. Railroad Park is this public park. The Alabama Symphony plays there down there sometimes. They have concerts. You can go down and walk your dog. I think there's like a little skate park. Runners go down there. And I remember one time we went down there for Christmas and they had a little ice skating rink, kind of a makeshift man-made kind of a thing. Because in Alabama, if we get snow, it's in like April for some reason.
Yeah.
But there was an ice skating rink. And I remember while I was standing there thinking, how remarkable this is. There were Black people, white people, Hispanic people, all kinds of different races, ethnicities, diversity that was happening all in that little ice skating rink. And I thought to myself how amazing that was, that just, decades before, this would have not been a thing that Birmingham would have been known for. And so maybe other people don't think that's an amazing thing, but I kind of stop and think about that sometimes. And I guess there's an element of Southern hospitality that goes with some of that stuff now, that everybody's just real friendly to each other. And we call out the jerks that they're jerks. Like we can let them know it. But I just think that we have progressed so much since then. And I would like to think that we are less prejudicial than most cities. Because I think if you know that history, when I was growing up, I knew all of that history. I knew about the 16th Street bombing. I knew about MLK Jr. I knew about the civil rights stuff that happened in Birmingham. We were taught that in school. Yeah. And I always remember thinking, like, I don't want to be like that. And so I don't know if there were other kids like me in my generation, but I think maybe that has informed some of the way that we act now.
Yeah, I'd imagine, growing up in that area, not only hearing about it in history class, but probably, firsthand accounts from like aunts, uncles, grandparents and stuff would have a profound effect on, how you treat those sorts of issues.
Yeah.
Obviously, it has to be better than the 50s and 60s, right? It's good to hear that, it's on an upward trend, and, let's hope that continues.
I agree.
All right, Rebecca, you've been a media professional for a number of years, but you also have a history of volunteering as a camera person at Buckhead Church in Birmingham.
Well, actually, it's Mountaintop Church. Buckhead was in Atlanta.
Oh, Mountaintop Church?
Yeah. I was a volunteer at Buckhead Church in Georgia, in Atlanta for 14 years, and then Mountaintop Church for 3 years.
Gotcha. Well, why don't you tell me about how you got involved with the Atlanta church and how it's transitioned over into the Birmingham church now that you're back?
Yeah. So when I was in Atlanta, I wanted to find a church and get involved somewhere. And so a friend of mine, my friend Christy, just happened to be, I knew her from college, and I was asking her where she went to church and what she was doing. And so she invited me to go over to Buckhead Church. And back then, this was so long ago, it was actually a church in an old grocery store. So they had renovated an old grocery store, and you could tell it was a grocery store when you kind of walked in. You could kind of feel it. But I just wanted to get involved with the production crew because I had experience with that. And when I was in Atlanta, I was working at Turner, but I was not using camera operation skills while I was in my day job. So I thought that would be a good way to keep up some of those things that I had learned, because I pretty much went there 2 years out of college. So I had learned all that stuff in college and wanted to keep up those skills.
Jerusalem, and they divided them up into smaller groups, and they would be given the task of doing the things at the temple that needed to be done. So you worked a few weeks, then you were off and went back to your, doing your normal job.
I fit right in there and did that for a long time. It was a live production skill set that I did. I did roaming cameras and stationary cameras. And so then when I moved back to Birmingham, I was like, well, I've been doing that so long, I should find another place to go to church and then try to get involved. And so I did seek out a church that had a pretty good production service opportunity. And so I do that maybe once a month, not as much as I maybe did at Buckhead Church, but I try to do it once a month, and it's usually stationary cameras.
Were you able to bring in any practices or techniques or anything from Atlanta, bring them back home to Birmingham?
Yeah, it's really funny because the church in Atlanta was very fast-paced. We had 6 cameras, and so the directors that, would direct there, they did it a lot. They knew what they were doing. Not to say that the directors of the church I go to now don't know what they're doing.
No shade.
It was much more fast-paced, and it was much more, the cuts were faster and the moves were faster. And so that's kind of, I've had to transition a little bit out of that, but I try to find ways to be creative with a stationary camera, which can be tough sometimes. So I play with focus and racking focus and try to find creative ways to do stuff. But I would love to try to sit in the director's chair at some point. That's one of my goals, is to maybe work my way up, do a little technical directing, and then work my way up to directing. Because I think I could make some adjustments and bring some of those skills with me.
Well, there's definitely one or two little productions I've heard of that you kind of serve that role in, like Supergirl Radio, for example.
Sure. Yeah. No, I actually do a lot of video stuff for Super Radio.
So basically, I think what we need to do here, we need to do like a letter writing campaign, right? To get you to be director at the new church.
Well, I've tried to start off, earning my cred by, doing my time as a camera operator, and then eventually maybe I'll get that chance in the future. But I want to earn that rapport with everybody else on the team. So when I get to the director's chair, they'll all respect me because they're like, Rebecca knows what she's doing.
I'll put myself full camera here so I can say Rebecca does know what she's doing, folks.
I appreciate that vote of confidence.
So, Rebecca, when you said you were going to come on the show to do this episode, I knew I had to ask you about this, and we kind of alluded to it before. You starred in my comedy podcast series, The Fakist, as a character named Leanne Snyder, who just so happens to work in a local Birmingham news station before getting a job for a national outlet in another city.
With my new contract signed, I hopped on the Greyhound bus back to Birmingham so I could collect my things and tell my grandma goodbye. Let's just say it didn't go great. Hey, Grandma! You'll never guess what...
Oh, you lovely little Annabelle. You didn't get that silly big city job. Here, dear, sit down and let Grandma make you a nice cup of her special memory tea so you can forget all about it.
Save your brew for somebody who needs it, Grandma. You're looking at the new executive producer in charge of production for The Fakist. I'll be working in somewhere west of New York City. Isn't that exciting? Me in the big city.
Pretty similar to the Rebecca Johnson story, by design in a lot of ways. What was it like for you to play a character for 3 years that was kind of very much based on you and your actual real life?
You actually made it so easy for me because I'm not an actress. I don't know anything about acting. I've never studied acting. Even when I was a kid, I tried to do plays and things. I could never memorize stuff. I was terrible. I did a one-act play in high school my senior year. I was mostly an extra, so it was. So this was actually a good way to dive into being a voice actress, and it was nice for me because I didn't have to really be an actress. I could just be myself. And so I don't think I'll be doing any other performance-based voice acting because I don't think I would be able to do it. But actually playing a character that was based off me helped me a lot in doing that, because I remember when you asked me to do it and I was like, really, do you want me to do this? I don't think I'm ready for this. But having something that I knew about and was familiar with, and especially with the news component, I felt very at home there with some of the ways that the stories were told and the things that they were doing. So that was actually, it was the right choice to base it on part of my life.
Yeah, the really interesting thing is that a lot of the individual details I based on your life sort of happened in your life after the fact. Like the one thing that I think of is I always had it planned for Leanne to come work at the Fakist, and eventually when her story concludes and she wins the day, go back home to Birmingham, return the hero's journey, return from whence she came.
Leanne, I never let myself believe you'd actually leave. But you should. You've grown our little Fakist fam into something pretty special. Without you, this whole place would have crumbled years ago. Go on home, Leanne. You've earned it.
Come here, you big faker.
I love hugs.
You two are warm.
Paul?
Yeah, Leanne and Grandma Snyder, who is hugging us right now, too?
You still need to reimburse me for that time I picked up your car at the mechanic.
Hey, look over there. The ghost of Birdman Stan.
Really?
Nope, later.
I can turn him into a pumpkin if you want.
I think it was a few months before I started working on the last season of The Fakist, where I was going to write this, how Leanne gets back to Birmingham. You moved back to Birmingham.
Yeah, when we started The Fakist, I was in Atlanta in my little closet recording that stuff in my house in Smyrna. So yeah, that's right.
I'm going to assume it was research for the role, which is why you moved back.
I was very dedicated.
Well, that's actually probably a good thing to talk about, though, right now is, you went to Atlanta for so many years and then you came back. Why did you end up coming back? And what was it like kind of readapting to an area you'd been gone from for, 14 years?
Yeah, 14 years. In 2019, my mom had 2 pulmonary embolisms, which are 2 big blood clots in your lungs.
Ooh.
And she was in pretty bad shape with those pulmonary embolisms. And I remember being in the hospital with her and my brother. And I hated having to leave them because I had to go back to Atlanta. And once she was kind of okay and back at the house, I had to go. And I remember thinking, this stinks that I can't help anymore now. And that started a thought process for me that was like, I could be there more often than I am now. I could do that. And I had been looking for a new job for a couple of years before that anyway. So I was already trying to have an exit strategy from Atlanta, and maybe not even from Atlanta, just from my job. I worked at Turner for 14 years. That's back when they were Turner. And now I don't know what they're called. Warner Media Group, whatever that's called
Warner
now.
Brothers, Discovery, Learning Channel, Expo.
I don't know what they're called now, but when I worked for them, it was Turner. And I had been trying to find a job in Atlanta and somewhere else. And even within Turner, I tried to find other jobs and nothing ever happened. And so I just took that incident with my mom, who did get better and she's doing great now. But I took that as a thought experiment for myself. Like, what would it be like if I did move back to Birmingham? How would that happen? What would I do? Yeah. And I remember talking to my friend Monica about, new jobs, because she had transitioned into different jobs. And she always told me, don't wait until you're out of work to get a new job. Make sure that you're still in a secure job situation and then look for the job.
It's monkey bars, right? You got to get your hand on the next one before.
Yeah. So I always thought about that. And so I just kept applying to things, and I don't know what compelled me to, I guess maybe it was because I was looking for Birmingham close jobs, that I found a job opportunity with the University of Alabama Museums, and I happened to apply for it because I was like, well, that sounds like something I could do. So I just applied to everything. I applied to the Botanical Gardens social media position. Like I won the Atlanta Botanical Gardens, I should specify. So I was applying to everything that I thought I could do. And it just so happened that one took and that they were interested. And that was my exit strategy. So there were a lot of things that took me out of Atlanta. At Turner, I had some great times there. I did some really cool things. Conan O'Brien showed up one day, and that was kind of interesting. He hated the heat. He talked about that a lot. So there were some. I stood in a fire drill situation next to Robert Osborne one day, and I still kick myself that I didn't ask him questions about Ginger Rogers. So I had some really interesting times at Turner. But towards the end of my career there, I didn't like my job anymore. It was actually kind of boring. I wasn't doing anything interesting anymore. I wasn't being challenged in what I was doing. I wasn't progressing anywhere.
Yeah.
And so I was kind of over it. And some of the culture there at that point was kind of unpleasant too. So there were just a lot of things that sort of built up. My house was kind of a disaster where I lived, and I was kind of tired of living there. So it was just, there were so many things in my life at that time that I was like,
you forgot the most important thing was that for like a year or two before you moved, one of your best friends in the whole world, Bill Meeks, moved away from Atlanta.
It's true. It was a real blow to my time in Georgia.
What's it been like for you moving back? Did you find your life sort of picked up right where it left off?
Well, I'm still trying to relearn Birmingham. I used to be able to get around downtown pretty well because before I worked at WVTM, I also interned for 6 months at what was then the AmSouth Bank building, which is now the Regions building. And so I worked at downtown for 6 months and then got a job at WVTM. So I was downtown a lot back then. And so now I'm having to relearn all the streets and where things are. And so that's been tough. But I mean, I would still come, even when I lived in Georgia, I would come home, once or twice a month. So I still kind of knew things, but I'm trying to remember, certain elements of where things are and what to do, trying to figure out, what's to do around here. I'm finding new museums and new things, new activities to do.
It was probably hard for you because, you moved back and then within a year, COVID-19 happened and everything? So.
Within 6 months,
Yeah,
I was
6 months.
I was in my job and living with my mom for 6 months. This is a transition period before I go and, get my own place or whatever. And then the world fell apart and I was like, well, okay, this is what it is now. So it has been a transitional period that I haven't totally, I guess, gotten out of.
Yeah.
But I have enjoyed being back, and I'm glad. I think it was one of the best decisions that I've ever made to come back. I don't regret it at all, because even though I've gained weight since my my time back in Birmingham, partially because of all the good food here, and also partially because Rebecca needs to exercise more.
Being stuck in the house probably didn't help a lot. I know a lot of us are having this issue.
So that's my only complaint about being back in Birmingham. It causes weight gain.
Another parallel that with our Fakist storyline, though, which I thought was really kind of interesting, was probably about a year before the whole COVID-19 thing happened. We did an improvised episode, which you were great on, about the big red cloud in somewhere west of New York City.
Oh, yeah.
Where everyone went into quarantine for a month. And it was me, or my character, Paul, your character, Leanne, and Wynn Mercer's character, Grace Hooper Stafford, all locked up in a bunker down below the station for a month plus. And who knew a year later that we would all basically be in that bunker with a big red cloud.
Welcome to the Fakecast, the official podcast for KCOM Studios' The Fakist, where we discuss the stories behind the fake news. My name is Leanne Snyder, and I'm the new co-anchor here at The Fakist. And since we are holed up in a deep underground bunker on account of that red cloud poisoning the city out there, I thought I would take this opportunity to get to know a coworker. And since Paul and Grace Hooper Stafford is down here, I thought we would take some time to talk to Grace, our socio-political reporter. So, Grace, yeah, that was foreshadowing, I think.
Foreshadowing for real life. If you haven't listened to The Fakist, go back and listen to it.
That is a good one.
There's stuff I called out in there that hasn't happened yet. You can be the first. You can be warned. You can save yourself.
It's all just a prophecy podcast is what it is.
Folks, we do have to take a quick break here to take a word from our sponsor, but we're going to be right back in just a couple of minutes with more Rebecca Johnson, Birmingham. Tons of fun. Stay tuned. Where I'm From is brought to you by Strean Studio. That's STREANN Studio, the web app that puts you in charge of the live show. Strean Studio allows you to take your streaming game to the next level by allowing you to stream to multiple platforms at once. If you want to go to Twitch, if you want to go to YouTube, you can stream to all of those platforms at once, get feedback from your audience, and most importantly, it puts you in control of the show. Now, Strean Studio has several packages that work for just about any type of broadcaster. From the free plan, where you can stream with a watermark, all the way up to the gold plan, where you can have up to 8 guests. You can stream to as many social platforms as you want. You can get a web link to share your show with external audiences, and you can even get an iframe so you can embed your live stream show directly into your website. Hey, I love Strean Studio so much, I'm using it to produce this show. I want to thank Strean Studio for supporting Where I'm From, and you can give this fantastic software a spin and support Where I'm From at the same time. Just head over to our website at billmeeks.com/whereimfrom and click on the Strean Studio banner so they know we sent you their way. And we're back.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Noyce, and you're listening to Supergirl Radio.
You know, in addition to Supergirl, because you host Supergirl Radio, you're a big fan of Supergirl, you love comic books in general. Were there a lot of outlets for a young comic book fan in Birmingham?
Well, after that incident I shouldn't say incident, after that experience of going to the local comic book shop to pick out my Dick Tracy comic, I didn't really get as hardcore into comic books until I actually moved to Atlanta. So that's kind of where I started to really dig into comic books. But even then, I think my biggest outlet for comics when I was growing up here in Birmingham were movies and TV shows. So I loved Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman. I did love and still do love the Helen Slater Supergirl movie. I don't care what you say. I still love it. I realize it has problems. I will defend it until my dying day.
I'll just say really quick, the way you differentiate Supergirl from Superman is you put her in a world of magic.
It works totally, 100%. I was a big Batman fan. And I still am, but when I was growing up, Batman 89 was the stuff. And I think a lot of people of my generation, I want to speak for you, Bill, but Batman 89 was so transformative for a lot of people, especially for people who love comics.
Absolutely.
That was a movie like that Dick Tracy movie. I had the t-shirts. I went to the fast food places to get the stuff. I had the Prince album. I remember playing the Prince songs on a jukebox in Waffle House.
Like Bat Dance and...
Bat Dance, yeah.
There's one that has like Vicky Vale. Vicky Vale is a sample.
So Batman 89 was such a big movie for me when I was growing up. And I remember, so this may be like my biggest comic book story that I can tell you that doesn't have anything to do with an actual comic book, but it's sort of tangentially related. But when I was growing up, I guess I must have been 12, Batman Returns came out on VHS. And I love Batman Returns. I probably love it more than Batman 89. I'm one of those weird people. I love Tim Burton. I know it's a kind of a creepy, weird movie. I think it's great. I think that's why I like it. But I remember it taking 7 months for that to come out on VHS. I remember like counting down the days for that to come out. And this was back in the day when we had things called, there was a store called Service Merchandise. And you had to, it was almost like a precursor to Amazon. You had to like order it and then somebody would go to the back and get it and it would come down to this like assembly line
one of those like catalog shops where you'd fill out the thing and you'd hand it at the counter. Yeah.
It was a weird, why did we do that? That was so weird. But I remember the day that my mom took me down. My mom really, now that I think about it, she really fed my my nerd geeky things. I don't know that my dad would have done this, but my mom took me down to buy the VHS copy of Batman Returns. And so that was kind of my biggest thing. I would sort of geek out on the nerdy stuff in my private time and my personal life, but like when you're a girl growing up, going to high school, middle school, the geeks have it good these days. But back then, in like the 90s and early 2000s when I was in college, like you didn't really talk about that stuff, even if you loved it.
Because you would get mercilessly mocked.
Probably if you were a girl, people would have thought that was weird. And maybe it was, but I didn't care. But
I always say weird is good. People always like go, oh, weird. I'm like, no. Embrace the weird.
So I didn't really get a chance to dig into like really reading comics until I moved to Atlanta, and I was kind of by myself, and so that was a way for me to read and kind of dig into something to pass the time. Sometimes when I first moved to Atlanta, I didn't have a lot of friends. I didn't know anybody. And so I know that sounds like a sad, sappy story, but comics were a good outlet for me to read some of those things and connect to those characters in my free time.
A lot of comic book fans have sad, sappy stories about it. Like me, I got into them so much because I was homeschooled and I wasn't really allowed to have friends outside of the church. And I didn't like the kids in our church. So I went and got comic books and Superman was my friend. Batman was my friend.
Right. Yeah. So I wish I had read more of them when I was growing up, but I more so leaned into the adaptations of them more than I did the actual books. So once it clicked for me, like what a comic book was and how, basically in my mind, it's like a storyboard.
Yeah.
It's a storyboard that tells the story of something. And I was like, oh, it's like a film. And so that really kind of clicked for me. And that started my love for comic books.
Along a similar line, the thing that kind of like really made me hook into comic books and think, beside these are cool superhero stories, no, this is an art form. Scott McCloud's thing where he talks about like the space in the gutters, and that's, you know, where your brain gets to make a movie every page of a comic book you read, you know, between the panels, like someone's like this with a gun, and then the next panel, you know, there's smoke coming out of the end of the gun. You get to fill in that blank, and it can be as big and expensive of CGI or whatever as you want, because, you know, you're the one imagining it. So.
Yeah, I can actually tie that to a Birmingham centric story.
I love it.
A couple of years ago, I went with my brother down to the Birmingham Museum of Art, and we were taking a class that was a free class offered there about slow art.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't know what slow art is, it's a movement in art to make you slow down and look at a painting or look at a sculpture and really take it in and let that inform what you think about it. What do you feel about it? You know, so you might stare at a painting. It sounds silly, but it's actually a really good practice. You look at in that class, we looked at some paintings for about 5 minutes, total silence with these other people in this group. And then the leader of the discussion would say, so what do you think? You know, what sticks out to you? And it was so funny because after so many, probably, I don't remember how old I was so it must have been a decade or more that I'd been reading comics at the time. And because of my comic book reading, when I did slow art, I could feel the temperature of the stuff outside. I could hear the noises that might have been taking place in that, you know, that landscape or whatever. You know, I could hear the little kids talking in the paint. Like I could just kind of envision that. And I think it was because of my comic book reading where I had to read words that, you know, told you what the sound was and made you, or at least made me have to feel what was going on in the comic book panels. And so I don't think I would have had that same experience with art if I had not been reading comic books. And so I always attribute my ability to feel and appreciate art a little more because of comics.
I always say, you know, it's next to jazz, it's really one of the only American art forms. And people think it's kids stuff, but there's some pretty advanced stuff going on in comic books for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, Rebecca. Well, we've almost done a full Tobolowsky. We've almost gone. We've pretty much gone as long as Stephen Tobolowsky did. But I do have one more game for you, if you're game for the game.
Let's do it.
Okay, excellent. This game's called
Hometown Hot Takes.
Now, what we do here is I give you two options, two different things from your hometown, usually, and you have to pick one as a winner and explain why.
Okay, I can do this.
Okay, first up, WVTM versus WDHN.
DHN. I don't even know DHN.
I believe it's the CBS affiliate.
I know ABC 3340. I know WBRC.
Okay, let's do out of all the stations.
Oh, okay.
Which one do you pick?
Oh, that's really tough because I haven't been inside. The only one I've been inside their studio recently, like within the last couple of weeks, was WBRC, and I was so impressed. Everything has changed so much. They have the remote control cameras inside this. There's nobody in this. There's no camera operator in the studio anymore.
Yeah, it's all the guy at like master control with a joystick.
I think that's cool. And it looks cool because there are like all these high-tech cameras that are just kind of hanging from the ceiling. So it's kind of interesting. But I think you also miss that human element of like actually having to truck a camera and like setting it up yourself. So there may be a downgrade in quality because of that.
It's news. It's not exactly film or something, but there's artistic choices to be made, and, you know, shooting a news person and rolling it around a news set, you know.
Yeah, I have fond memories of WVTM and the people there, even though it was super stressful. I really liked the people I worked with. But if I had to pick one, because WBRC has been good to my job. So I guess I will say WBRC just because they have been so good to what I do with the University of Alabama Museums. And
I'm just writing down here that your pick has a professional consideration attached to it, so it should be considered suspect.
That we can be transparent about that, yes.
Okay, next up, this is since both companies have major bottling operations in Birmingham, Coke versus Pepsi.
Ooh, well, if I was in Atlanta, I would have to say Coke.
Because
But
that's the big mothership Coke.
yes,
is in
you
Atlanta.
cannot drink Pepsi if you live in Atlanta. It's funny. A lot of people will, when they talk about Southern things, they'll talk about peanuts and Coke. I have never once done that. I don't know who these people are who do
Like just
that.
toss whole peanuts into Coke?
I guess so.
Oh.
I guess I'm gonna have to try it now that I'm back in Birmingham. I don't know who these people are.
It's like boba, but aggressive.
But I'm kind of more of a Pepsi girl. I remember being in the $1 Million Band when I was at the University of Alabama, and after the halftime shows, they would hand out Pepsis, and that was like your big reward for having done the halftime show. Is you got that at post halftime Pepsi, and that was a good Pepsi. Like that was
Nice.
like it just tasted so much better after that. So I think if I don't drink sodas anymore, but I think if I had to pick one, I'd probably pick Pepsi.
Okay, so the Vulcan statue versus that Vulcan we all know as Mr. Spock.
Well, I'm not a Star Trek person. I'm more of a Star Wars person. So I respect Spock. It's not that I'm hating on Spock, but I just don't have an attachment to him. I've only been at the top of Vulcan once. I used to drive by it all the time because WVTM is right up there. It's in that same sort of location. You have to go up the same scary hill to get there. And I remember before the world ended because of the COVID-19 pandemic, it was for your documentary that you were making, and you gave out some prompts.
Yeah.
And one of them was like to go to a place in your hometown you've never been to before or something like that. And I was like, well, I've been wanting to go to Vulcan and I haven't. And it was almost a mistake because I was like, yeah, I can walk the steps. You can walk the steps, or there may be an elevator or something in there. I can't remember now. It's been a couple of years. But I was like, oh, I got this. I can get up the steps. It's no problem. And it was a severe amount of steps. I was like, I don't know that I can get to the top. So that was my first mistake. Then I got to the second mistake was when I got to the top. I finally made it. And I've developed over the last couple of years, like a little bit of a fear of heights, but I forced myself to do it. I was a little terrified to be on that edge. I only stayed out there for maybe 2 minutes, but I stayed out there long enough to get a selfie with a Vulcan and go back down. But I was glad that I did it because Vulcan is such a recognizable figure in Birmingham. And he was even used, Birmingham was recently the host of the World Games. And I think he was used, they had the trophies were little Vulcans. So I think Vulcan, even though you can see his bare butt, so he's mooning the entire city, I think he's a landmark that you can't miss and is very Birmingham, and actually has a great museum that's attached to it that tells the story of Birmingham. So if you go to Vulcan, go inside the museum because it's very well done. So yeah, I'm gonna go Birmingham Vulcan on this.
You
one.
say mooning the city, I say high arcs. Rebecca, I don't know anything about sports. I'm gonna try this here. Bulls versus Stallions?
Okay, so the Birmingham Bulls.
Yeah.
I have not been to a Birmingham Bulls game since I was probably in middle school. I need to go back. I recently learned that the University of Alabama has a hockey team. And so I'm like, well, I got to go hockey games now. I've got the Birmingham Bulls and I've got the University of Alabama hockey team that calls themselves the Frozen Tide, which I think is adorable. And so I'm going to go Birmingham Bulls because I actually used to go to those games a while back and I had a lot of fun.
Okay, moon pies versus banana pudding.
Oh, that's not even a question. It's banana pudding. Oh my gosh. I've tried moon pies. They throw them out at Mardi Gras. If you don't know, Mobile, Alabama is actually the original Mardi Gras. New Orleans kind of took it and has become maybe more famous, but
they really ran with it.
The Mobile Mardi Gras is the real deal. But in the Mardi Gras Mobile, actually in the $1 Million Band, when I was at the University of Alabama, we marched a parade. There was a Mardi Gras parade that we marched in, and I think we ended up marching like 7 miles. It was something ridiculous.
Oh wow!
It was so exhausting. I never want to march in a parade ever again after. But I remember when we were marching, people would throw moon pies at the band while we were going. I was like, nope, this has turned me off moon pies forever.
Moon pies aren't particularly hard, but I'm sure getting one chucked at you does not feel great.
There's a heft to them. There's a weight to them.
Oh yeah.
But banana pudding, though, even aside the Mardi Gras story, banana pudding is, you talk about high art. There is an art to that. Dreamland has a really good banana pudding. A lot of the barbecue places do some really good banana pudding, but
Do they put like the Nilla wafers in the banana pudding?
Oh yeah. You got to have the Nilla wafers in there. That's like a key component.
Got to.
Yeah, I'm a banana pudding girl all the way through.
Okay, and Rebecca, last but not least, Alabama the state versus Alabama the band.
I'm trying to think of all the songs I know from Alabama the band. Are they the ones that did Dixieland Delight? I cannot remember. I mean, Alabama the state. I think there's probably a song by Alabama that I really like that I cannot think of at the moment. But Alabama the state, I've really taken to heart to rediscover this place because there's a lot of amazing things here, and some things I did when I was growing up, like, in Montgomery, we have the Alabama Shakespeare Festival. So I like to go down there to see some Shakespeare. I went to see Macbeth recently, and
Shakespeare.
if it's not Shakespeare, I don't want it. So like that's really awesome. I recently went to Helen Keller's house. I had never been there in Tuscumbia, Alabama. I'd never been to the Fame recording studios where Aretha Franklin recorded Respect and all of those things. That's in Muscle Shoals, a very famous place for music. I'd never been there before. So I'm trying to mark off all these like famous places in Alabama that I have never been to. And there's some small towns and some beautiful places that I want to go to. Everybody tells me about Mentone, Alabama. What's in Mentone? I don't know, but everybody tells me to go there. So that Mentone, Alabama is on my list. And everyone I work with the Alabama Museum of Natural History, and everybody there talks about the biodiversity of Alabama, which basically means we have a lot of stuff here in terms of living organisms. And we have like the best biodiversity here. That means we have a lot of variety of plants and trees and animals and bugs and birds. And so it's something that I'm trying to pay more attention to because of how famous it is. People will come to Birmingham, but the state of Alabama, people will come to Alabama for research purposes because of that great biodiversity. So we'll have people from, I work with a guy who's from the Netherlands. I work with a guy who lived in New York at one point. Like people come from all over to Alabama because our natural world and our nature areas are so beautiful and so unique. So I just love being back in Alabama. I think it's a great place. People outside of Alabama have this old-fashioned notion that we're all a bunch of rednecks and we don't have running water and we don't have shoes and we just, we're just
yes, I know. I wrote Grandma Snyder on the Fakist Pretty Country. Sorry about that.
I mean, for the Fakist, an exaggeration was actually appropriate. But a lot of people think we're just like rednecks who don't know anything, that are just all inbred. And I'm like, we have rocket scientists here. Like we have we've sent people to space. Like, wow, we have an amazing, diverse aspect of our history. That we have here in terms of, I mean, even the fossil record and all this stuff. I mean, Alabama used to be underwater, so there's a lot of sea creatures and shark teeth. I mean, it's crazy down here. So we have a lot to offer here in Alabama, and I really just don't think people understand that Alabama is actually a really awesome place. And so I just want to be the representative, if I can represent the state of Alabama, to say we deserve a little more respect, I think. And you're welcome for the space exploration.
Well, Rebecca, I have some good news for you. You were losing. You had like negative 300 points.
No, that's bad.
That passionate advocacy for Alabama right there at the end put you over the top. You're at 17 million points. You win.
Hometown Hot Takes.
Congratulations.
Yes, awesome. I feel so accomplished. Thank you.
Nice. All right. Well, that about does it for the show tonight. Rebecca, I want to thank you so much for joining us. I know you were a little hesitant to be on the show. I thought you did a great job. If people enjoyed that Rebecca Johnson brand of content, where can they find more of it?
Sure. I'm not a famous person. So I appreciate Bill slumming it with me.
You're famous to me. So you're the voice of Leanne Snyder from The Fakist.
I guess that does make me a voice actress of note. But if you would like to follow me, there are a couple ways you can do it. You can check me out on Super Radio, or a weekly podcast about the CW Supergirl TV series, but about all things Supergirl and Kara Zor-El. So if you like comics, if you like animation, if you like the Helen Slater movie, we talk about that. We actually had a debate where we debated it out. I defended it. So we talk all things Supergirl. So if you want to check that out, you can go to supergirlradio.com. I also have a personal YouTube channel, youtube.com/duckmilkprod, where I do film analysis. So I talk about other people's reviews and I talk about why they're terrible. And so I try to use that as a way to talk about art criticism and how we talk about film. So I have that. And if you're interested in any of my my daytime, well, I guess daytime, but sometimes nighttime.
Daytime, day job.
Day job. I mean, sometimes I work at night. So sometimes it's nighttime. But you can follow the University of Alabama museums. We're on all the big platforms, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. We're also on YouTube and TikTok. We got students doing TikToks for us. And we have 5 museums that cover all manners of history. And I've learned to be a amateur paleontologist, archaeologist, naturalist, historian. I've taken on a lot of things through my job. So if you want to check out what we do at the University of Alabama with the museums, you can follow us on all the social platforms.
A regular Renaissance woman. I'll tell you what.
I try to be, and mostly because I have to be. So, if I don't know what to do, I figure it out. So I try to do as much as I can.
Nice. All right. Well, we want to thank anyone who showed up for the live stream tonight or is checking this out on the DVR, the podcast route. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. If you like the show, please go over and subscribe to the Where I'm From podcast YouTube channel. You can also leave us a review over on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. I think Spotify does reviews or ratings. Help us float us up to more people. And you can check out everything about the show notes, links to the stuff we talked about, all of that stuff at billmeeks.com/where I'm from, all one word. Other than that, definitely shoot me an email at bill@billmeeks.com. If you have any thoughts about what Rebecca said tonight, if you want to talk about where you're from, love to have you on the show. Past that, I think that about does it for this week. It's been a great time. Rebecca's almost done 1.5 Toblowskis, which is pretty impressive.
I'm honored.
But please join us here next week where we talk to somebody else about where they're from. See you next time.